You know what's interesting about highly intelligent people? They're almost never the ones drawing attention to how smart they are. In fact, most of the time, the sharpest minds in any given room are the quietest. It's not that they have nothing to say, it's that they've learned, often through experience, that certain behaviors cost more than they're worth. And while most conversations about intelligence focus on what smart people do, there's something surprisingly revealing about looking at it from the other direction, what they don't do. The first thing highly intelligent people almost never do is react in the moment they feel provoked. And this isn't about being naturally calm. Many of them feel provocation intensely, but somewhere along the way, their brain learned to insert a gap between the emotional impulse and the behavioral response. Psychologists refer to this as cognitive reappraisal, the ability to reframe a situation before responding to it. Picture this. Someone makes a dismissive comment in a meeting. Everyone at the table watches to see what happens next. And the intelligent person does something that looks, from the outside, like nothing. They pause. Maybe they take a sip of water. Maybe they let the silence sit for 2 seconds longer than feels comfortable. And when they do respond, it's measured, precise, and completely stripped of the heat that the other person was trying to provoke. Research in affective neuroscience has shown that individuals with higher cognitive ability tend to engage the prefrontal cortex more effectively during moments of emotional activation, which essentially means they're better at overriding the initial impulse to fire back. It doesn't mean they don't feel the sting. It means they've learned that what you do in the first 3 seconds of anger almost never represents what you actually think. The second is pretending to understand something they don't. This one runs deeper than it sounds. In most social and professional environments, there's enormous pressure to appear knowledgeable, to nod along, to give the impression that you're following, even when you're completely lost. Everyone's been in that meeting where someone uses a term you've never heard, and instead of asking what it means, you just keep nodding because the cost of looking uninformed feels too high. Highly intelligent people tend to resist that pressure. They'll be the one who raises their hand and says, "Can you walk me through that again? I want to make sure I actually understand it." Psychologists connect this to a trait called intellectual humility, which research has consistently linked to higher reasoning ability. The willingness to say, "I don't know," isn't a concession in these individuals. It's a strategy, one that keeps the mind open to information that pretending would have quietly shut out. There's a third pattern that often gets misread, and it's the tendency to walk away from arguments that aren't going anywhere. This is one of the most misunderstood behaviors in highly intelligent people. From the outside, it can look like they're backing down or being passive. But what's actually happening is more strategic than that. They've recognized something that most people miss. The vast majority of arguments have nothing to do with logic. They're about ego. And engaging in an ego-driven exchange doesn't produce clarity, it produces heat. You've seen this happen. Two people debating something at a dinner party, and at some point it stops being about the topic and starts being about who's going to concede first. The intelligent person is the one who notices that shift and quietly steps out of the loop. Cognitive psychologists have studied this under the framework of what's called my side bias, the tendency for people to evaluate evidence in ways that favor their existing position regardless of its quality. Intelligent people notice this bias operating in real time, and they've learned that stepping away from an unwinnable argument isn't retreat, it's resource management. And here's something that's easy to overlook about those first 3 patterns. The pause before reacting, the honesty about not knowing, the refusal to argue without purpose. None of them look impressive from the outside. They look quiet, they look passive, and that's precisely why they get misread so often. Intelligence expressed through restraint almost never gets recognized as intelligence. It gets mistaken for indifference, which, if you think about it, is kind of the ultimate irony of being smart. The smarter the move, the less likely anyone is to notice it. The fourth pattern is chasing external validation as a measure of self-worth. Highly intelligent individuals tend to develop over time what psychologists call an internal locus of evaluation. Their sense of whether something is good, whether a decision was right, whether their work has value, comes primarily from their own assessment, rather than from the reactions of others. Think about the difference between someone who finishes a presentation and immediately scans the room for approval, versus someone who finishes and already knows internally whether they delivered what they intended. That second person isn't arrogant. They've just built a compass that doesn't need to be recalibrated every time someone disagrees with them. Research in self-determination theory suggests that this kind of internal anchoring is strongly correlated with both cognitive ability and long-term psychological well-being. They've learned that external approval is unreliable data, and they've stopped building their identity around unreliable data. Consider this one for a moment, because it catches a lot of people off guard. The fifth thing highly intelligent people rarely do is stay in environments that chronically understimulate them. And this one is often misread as restlessness or dissatisfaction. The person who quits a stable job that everyone else thought was perfectly good. The one who drifts away from a friend group that seems fine on paper. From the outside, it looks like they can't be satisfied. But what's actually happening is neurological. Studies on cognitive engagement suggest that individuals with higher intellectual capacity require more complexity and novelty to maintain optimal arousal in the prefrontal cortex. When that stimulation isn't present, the brain doesn't just get bored, it starts to deteriorate in engagement, focus, and motivation. It's a nervous system communicating that it's starving, and ignoring that signal, for the sake of looking stable or grateful, tends to cost more in the long run than listening to it. The sixth pattern is subtle but important. Taking criticism personally before processing it analytically. Highly intelligent people still feel the emotional impact of criticism. They're not robots. Somebody tells them their work is subpar, and there's a moment where it lands, where the stomach drops and the ego flinches. The difference is what happens in the next few seconds. Instead of building a defense or spiraling into self-doubt, their brain shifts into a different gear. They ask, almost reflexively, is there something useful in this? Psychologists describe this as a form of metacognitive regulation, the ability to observe your own emotional response and choose whether to follow it or examine it. It's not indifference. It's the learned ability to extract the value from feedback without letting the delivery dictate their entire response to it. Which brings us to the seventh pattern, and it's one that genuinely surprises people. Highly intelligent individuals almost never assume they're the smartest person in the room. In fact, the research suggests they tend to assume the opposite. This connects directly to work on metacognitive awareness. The same capacity that allows someone to evaluate their own thinking also reveals, with uncomfortable clarity, how much they don't know. The more clearly you can see the boundaries of your own understanding, the less likely you are to overestimate your position. This is the inverse of the well-documented Dunning-Kruger effect. People with limited knowledge overestimate their competence precisely because they lack the cognitive tools to see what they're missing. Highly intelligent individuals have those tools, which means their default state is closer to strategic doubt than to confidence. It's a strange position to be in, knowing enough to know how little you know. Have you ever noticed how often smart people agonize over decisions that seem simple to everyone else? That's the eighth pattern, making decisions based purely on how they feel in the moment. This doesn't mean they ignore emotions. It means they've learned to recognize when an emotional state is temporary and when it's signaling something real. The friend who's furious on Monday and ready to quit their job, and by Wednesday realizes they were just exhausted. The intelligent person recognizes that sequence before it plays out. Behavioral economists call this the distinction between experienced utility and decision utility, the difference between how something feels right now and how it will actually play out over time. Highly intelligent people tend to be unusually good at projecting forward, at running mental simulations of how a decision made today will feel 6 months from now. And that capacity, while sometimes mistaken for overthinking, is actually one of the most sophisticated forms of self-regulation there is. The ninth pattern is counterintuitive. You'd think smart people would gravitate toward others who validate their thinking, but the opposite tends to be true. Highly intelligent individuals actively seek out perspectives that challenge their own. They want the friend who says, "I think you're wrong about this," not the one who nods along to keep the peace. Cognitive psychologists connect this to a trait called need for cognition, a measurable drive to engage with complex, effortful thinking rather than defaulting to easy answers. People high in this trait don't just tolerate intellectual friction, they pursue it. They've recognized something that takes most people years to learn, that the quality of your thinking depends directly on the quality of the disagreement you're willing to sit with. And the 10th, perhaps the most quietly defining pattern of all, is living on autopilot. Highly intelligent people tend to resist routines that are purely habitual, systems that run without reflection, days that repeat without examination. This isn't about productivity or optimization, it's about a deeper cognitive need to remain engaged with the architecture of their own life. They ask questions that most people stop asking after a certain age. Why am I doing this? Does this still make sense? Is this the life I'm actually building, or is it the one I just drifted into? Research on reflective functioning, the capacity to think about one's own mental states and motivations, suggests that this kind of ongoing self-examination is both a hallmark of high intelligence and a source of the quiet restlessness that often comes with it. They can't simply coast. Their brain won't let them. Here's what ties all of these patterns together. Intelligence, in the way psychology actually studies it, isn't about knowing more than other people. It's about processing differently. It's about recognizing patterns in behavior, in systems, in relationships, and adjusting accordingly. The 10 things we've just walked through aren't rules that intelligent people follow. They're behaviors that a highly active mind naturally moves away from over time, because it sees, clearly and repeatedly, where those behaviors lead. And maybe the most useful thing to take from all of this isn't a list of things to stop doing. Maybe it's the recognition that intelligence, real intelligence, shows up most clearly not in what a person says or achieves, but in the quiet, almost invisible choices they make every day about where to put their energy and where to finally stop wasting it. See you in the next one.